I am Claire, 33 years old, and I used to think the man I married was my protector. I was rushing to work one morning and accidentally grabbed my husband's phone instead of my own. As soon as I boarded the train, my sister-in-law called. Before I could even say hello, she started screaming about a $150,000 wire transfer and reminding my husband to keep me distracted so I would not check my company bank accounts. Then she mentioned that someone named Monica needed private preschool tuition paid by Friday. I did not scream or cry. I simply tapped record on my Apple Watch. If you have ever believed the person sleeping next to you had your best interests at heart, you need to hear this. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to see how I legally dismantled an entire family of parasites and sent them straight to federal prison. Growing up, I learned that success requires relentless focus and unshakable boundaries. I built my data analytics firm from a tiny shared workspace into a highly profitable enterprise, occupying the 40th floor of a downtown Chicago high-rise. The morning started with my alarm failing to go off, setting a frantic pace for the rest of the routine. I rushed through my shower, threw on my tailored charcoal suit, and headed downstairs to the kitchen of our upscale brownstone. My husband Liam was standing by the marble island, meticulously crafting his morning pour over coffee. Liam is 35 years old and works as a mid-level manager at a corporate financial consulting firm. He always carries himself with an inflated sense of self-importance. At social gatherings, he loves to boast about his finance career while patronizingly referring to my thriving business as my cute little tech startup. He handed me a travel mug of coffee, but in my haste to check the location of my delayed rideshare, I bumped my elbow against the counter. Liam sighed heavily, grabbing a towel with an exaggerated display of patience. He told me I needed to slow down before I caused a real disaster. I mumbled an apology, wiped my hands, and reached for my phone resting next to the coffee maker. We both had the exact same matte black phone cases, a sleek matching set Liam had purchased for us just last month. Without looking twice, I shoved the black device into my coat pocket, kissed his cheek, and ran out the front door into the biting Chicago wind. I navigated the crowded sidewalks and hurried down the steps into the transit station. The train was packed with morning commuters, a sea of gray and black coats huddled together. I squeezed into a corner seat. I reached into my pocket to check my morning schedule. I pressed the power button, and instead of my company logo on the lock screen, a picture of Liam holding a golf club greeted me. I had grabbed his phone by mistake. I figured I would simply message him from my laptop once I reached the office and arranged to swap phones during my lunch break. I slipped the phone back into my hand, watching the city buildings blur past the train window. Suddenly, the device vibrated violently against my palm. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller displayed the name Rachel. Rachel is Liam's 31-year-old sister. She is deeply entitled, notoriously lazy, and constantly looking for handouts. She and her husband Trey were the ultimate opportunists. Trey is an African-American man who spends his days bragging about his grand vision to open an exclusive fine dining fusion restaurant. The only problem is that Trey has absolutely zero culinary background, no business plan, and completely empty pockets. They frequently begged Liam for financial favors, always expecting us to foot the bill for their lavish lifestyle choices. Figuring Rachel might be calling to complain about our upcoming family dinner arrangements, I swiped the green button to accept the call. I intended to quickly explain the phone mix-up and tell her to call my office line. I brought the speaker to my ear and opened my mouth to speak. Before a single sound could escape my lips, Rachel's shrill voice blasted through the receiver with frantic, aggressive energy. "Did you wire the $150,000 yet?" she demanded, completely skipping any normal greeting. "You need to hurry up. Trey is sitting at the commercial real estate broker's office right now. He is just waiting on the funds to clear so he can finally sign the lease for the restaurant space." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. $150,000. What on earth was she talking about? Rachel did not stop for breath. Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial hiss. "You better keep that idiot Claire distracted today. Take her out to dinner or buy her something shiny. Just do whatever it takes so she does not check her company operating accounts until the money is completely washed through Trey's business. You know exactly how psychotic she gets when she reviews the end-of-month ledgers. The train rattled loudly over the metal tracks. Oh, and before I forget, she continued casually. Monica texted me this morning. She said you need to send the money for the kids' private preschool tuition by Friday. She is threatening to call Claire directly if you do not pay up. You really need to keep your baby mama happy, Liam. We cannot risk everything blowing up right before the restaurant launch. I did not scream or cry or drop the phone. I simply raised my left wrist, tapped the record application on my Apple Watch, and silently ended the call. The train plunged into absolute darkness. My husband was a thief. I smiled. The train shot out of the dark tunnel into the bright morning light. I had 30 minutes left before my stop. I stared at the sleek black device, the screen locked, demanding a passcode. Liam changed it months ago, claiming his corporate security policy required a complex sequence. I closed my eyes and scanned through years of shared history. Liam was a creature of predictable habits. He lacked imagination for true security. I remembered the combination he used for his old athletic club locker when we first started dating. It was a simple sequence combining his mother Beatrice's birth month and the year he secured his first junior management position. I typed the 6 digits. The phone unlocked instantly, bypassing all security. Crossing this digital boundary would permanently obliterate the life I built over the last 10 years. But that life was already a carefully constructed illusion. As I opened his financial applications, my mind drifted to the Sunday dinners I endured with his family. Richard and Beatrice always treated me with a barely concealed layer of condescension. To them, my data analytics firm was a cute little startup, a temporary hobby to keep me busy until I assumed my proper role as a submissive wife. They praised Liam's mid-level finance job as the true pillar of our household. Beatrice would loudly commend him for carrying the financial weight of our marriage, ignoring the factual reality that my company generated 10 times his annual salary. Liam never corrected them. He simply soaked up their adoration, playing the role of the exhausted provider. Now I understood why he needed them to believe that false narrative. He was using my wealth to build an empire of lies. I scrolled past the text threads and tapped directly on his photo gallery app. The main grid was perfectly curated for public consumption. There were pictures of our recent anniversary dinner, photos of his weekend golf outings, and endless snapshots of his overpriced sports car. It was the flawless digital footprint of a loyal husband. But I knew how to look deeper. I navigated to the album settings and located the hidden folder icon. It required the passcode one more time. I entered the digits and the folder opened to reveal hundreds of concealed images. I stared at the screen, my heart beating with a slow, controlled rhythm. The most recent uploaded photos documented a lavish birthday party for a 3-year-old boy. The event was hosted at an expensive indoor playground facility, complete with customized banners and catered food. I swiped through the high-resolution images, taking in the smiling faces of the invited guests. There was Rachel laughing loudly and holding a wrapped gift box. Standing next to her was her husband, Trey. As an African-American man who constantly boasted about his sophisticated palate and imminent culinary empire, Trey looked completely in his element, holding a massive slice of gourmet cake and toasting the camera. Trey did not even know how to sear a basic steak, yet he strutted around the expensive party, acting like a hospitality mogul. I swiped to the next photo. The breath left my lungs. Standing proudly by a mountain of expensive presents were my in-laws, Richard and Beatrice. Beatrice was glowing with an unrestrained joy I had never once seen her direct toward me. She was warmly hugging a young, attractive woman with long, dark hair. This had to be Monica. The exact woman who desperately needed my money to urgently pay for private preschool tuition. The woman who was threatening to expose the secret I was holding in the palm of my hand. I continued swiping, my finger moving methodically across the glass. I found numerous group shots, intimate candid moments, and heavily posed family portraits. They were all celebrating together. Rachel, Trey, Richard, Beatrice, Liam, and Monica. They looked exactly like a perfect happy family. They were smiling brightly, sharing inside jokes, and reveling in a luxurious life funded entirely by my grueling 80-hour work weeks and corporate success. They had sat at my dining table, drank my expensive wine, and slept in my guest rooms, all while harboring this massive betrayal. Then I landed on the final picture stored in the album. It was a sharp close-up shot of the birthday boy. He was wearing a tiny tailored suit sitting high up on Liam's broad shoulders. The boy was looking directly into the camera lens with absolute confidence. I zoomed in tightly on the child's small face. The physical resemblance was undeniable, an absolute biological certainty. He had Liam's exact strong jawline, the same distinct slope of his nose, and those familiar piercing eyes. The eyes I had looked into every night before falling asleep. The eyes of a man who had sworn absolute loyalty and promised a beautiful future. The boy was exactly 3 years old. That meant Liam had started this affair during the exact same period my company was navigating its toughest early expansion phase. While I was pulling endless all-nighters at the downtown office to secure our shared financial future, he was busy creating a totally secondary family behind my back. The train's automated voice announced my destination stop. I locked the phone screen and slipped the device back into my coat pocket. The absolute reality of the situation washed over me with crystal clear precision. The entire family knew all about the ongoing affair. They had welcomed his mistress with wide open arms. They had joyfully embraced his illegitimate child. Worst of all, they had happily conspired together to use my hard-earned money to fully fund this secret existence. They truly thought I was just a blind, obedient cash cow. They thought they could easily siphon away my wealth to finance Trey's fake restaurant and Monica's luxury lifestyle. I stood up slowly, smoothing the minor wrinkles from my dark charcoal suit. They had severely underestimated the woman they were actively stealing from. I stepped off the elevator onto the 40th floor marble, reflecting the morning sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The reception area was already buzzing with my early morning staff, but I walked past them with a sharp nod projecting the image of a highly focused executive preparing for another aggressive fiscal quarter. I entered my corner office, shut the heavy oak door, and turned the deadbolt until it clicked solidly into place. I lowered the motorized blinds, plunging the expansive room into artificial twilight. I walked over to my custom glass desk and opened my secure laptop. I pulled Liam's black phone from my coat pocket and connected it to my machine using a specialized data transfer cable I always kept stored in my bottom desk drawer. As the chief executive officer of a prominent data analytics firm, extracting hidden information was not just my daily profession, it was my absolute specialty. I initiated a deep system clone, backing up the entire hard drive directly to an offshore encrypted cloud server I maintained exclusively for sensitive corporate acquisitions. I watched the progress bar inch forward methodically, pulling every text message, every bank routing number, every hidden photograph, and every piece of location data Liam thought he had successfully erased. The progress bar reached 100%. The raw data was fully secured. I disconnected the device. I opened the newly created digital archive on my high-resolution laptop monitor. I needed to see the full scope of their massive financial conspiracy. I bypassed the highly predictable messages with his mistress and navigated straight to the text threads between Liam and his mother. Beatrice had always played the role of the traditional, morally upright matriarch who judged everyone around her. I clicked on her message history and scrolled back through the past 6 months of their daily communication. The level of cold calculation in her written words was completely staggering. They deeply discussed my grueling work schedule, specifically monitoring when I would be exhausted enough to slip up on reviewing our joint personal finances. They mocked my absolute dedication to the very company that was actively funding their luxurious lifestyle. Then I found the exact message that solidified my new mission. The text from Beatrice read precisely like a ruthless battle command. She wrote that I was too focused on my spreadsheets to ever notice the money missing. She explicitly instructed him to make sure he secured the house before he served me the papers. I read those specific 2 sentences over and over again until the letters burned into my memory. They were not just stealing my money to fund Trey's fake restaurant and Monica's high-end preschool tuition. They were conspiring to legally strip me of my $1.2 million premarital property. Liam fully intended to drop divorce papers on me the absolute second the bank cleared his fraudulent home equity loan. They genuinely believed my lifelong obsession with data made me completely oblivious to their daily reality. They viewed me as nothing more than a highly functioning cash machine, a temporary resource to be drained and casually discarded when empty. I felt a profound, permanent shift deep in my chest. The last remaining trace of the loving, dedicated wife completely evaporated, replaced instantly by the ruthless corporate strategist who had decimated rival companies to build a massive business empire. I would not confront him with tearful accusations or demand an apology. I would not engage in a screaming match about his pathetic infidelity. I would completely and utterly bury him. I pulled a microfiber cloth from my desk and meticulously wiped Liam's phone screen clean, erasing any physical trace of my fingerprints. I packed my leather briefcase with deliberate, perfectly measured movements. I opened my lower desk drawer and pulled out an untraceable burner phone I only used for testing internal security protocols. I ordered a premium rideshare back to our brownstone, ensuring the cash transaction would never appear on our joint credit card statements. I walked back out through my bustling office, instructing my executive assistant to hold all my calls for the remainder of the morning because I had a sudden personal matter to aggressively manage. The ride back to the neighborhood felt entirely different than the panicked commute earlier that morning. I watched the towering Chicago skyline roll by the darkly tinted windows of the black sport utility vehicle. Every towering building, every busy street corner, every passing pedestrian seemed significantly sharper and clearer. I was no longer a heartbroken victim reacting to a sudden devastating betrayal. I was the master architect of their impending destruction. They wanted to play a high-stakes game with federal bank loans and stolen corporate funds. I was going to let them play, and I was going to make sure the federal government acted as the final judge. The vehicle pulled up to the curb directly outside our immaculate brownstone. I paid the driver in physical cash and walked up the concrete front steps with absolute unwavering confidence. I slid my metal key into the brass lock, turning it completely silently. I pushed the heavy door open just as Liam came rushing down the main hardwood staircase. He was frantically patting down the deep pockets of his expensive wool winter coat, muttering under his breath, his face completely pale and tight, with rapidly rising panic as he looked around. He was desperately searching for the digital device that contained the detailed blueprints to his hidden secret life. I stood perfectly still in the grand foyer, quietly watching his pathetic display of terror unfold before me. I held the black phone up in my right hand, making sure the morning light caught the smooth edge of the protective case. I looked directly into his panicked, wide-open eyes and let a perfect, warm, loving smile spread across my face. "You left this on the counter, honey." Liam froze for a fraction of a second, his chest heaving as the raw terror slowly drained from his face. A heavy breath escaped his lungs. He snatched the phone from my hand with a speed that betrayed his internal panic. Then he caught himself, forced his shoulders to relax, and pulled me into a tight embrace. He pressed a kiss to my forehead, unaware that he was holding a woman who had just downloaded the entire blueprint of his deceit. He chuckled nervously, sliding the device into his suit pocket. He told me I was a lifesaver and that he thought he had lost his mind trying to find it. I maintained my perfectly crafted smile, adjusting his tie with the affection of a devoted wife. I told him to have a wonderful day at the office. He walked out the door, believing his secret world was completely secure. 3 days later, that same nauseating charade continued at an exclusive Chicago steakhouse. Liam insisted we treat his family to a weekend dinner to celebrate Trey securing the commercial lease for his new business venture. I knew exactly where the funds for that lease originated, but I played my part flawlessly. The restaurant was a dimly lit sanctuary of dark mahogany, expensive leather booths, and crystal chandeliers. We were seated at a large round table right in the center of the main dining room. I sat quietly sipping my sparkling water and observed the parasites gathered around me. Richard and Beatrice sat across from us, exuding an unearned sense of superiority. Rachel sat next to Trey, dripping in designer jewelry she could not afford on her own salary. Beatrice leaned over her menu, her eyes scanning my tailored navy blue blazer with disdain. She let out a soft, theatrical sigh designed to capture the attention of the entire table. She announced loudly that women running companies just lose their feminine touch. She shook her head and declared to the group that they should all thank God Liam is the real provider of our household. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. This woman was actively orchestrating the theft of my money, yet she still felt entitled to diminish my accomplishments. Liam simply chuckled, patting my hand condescendingly, and told his mother I was doing my best. I did not argue. I did not defend my wardrobe or my massive corporate income. I just let a serene smile touch my lips and took a slow sip of my Cabernet. Let them enjoy their fantasy a little while longer. Trey immediately redirected the spotlight onto himself. He summoned the waiter, projecting the arrogant confidence of a self-made millionaire. Without consulting anyone else, Trey ordered the colossal dry-aged tomahawk ribeye steak. He then demanded a specific $300 bottle of imported red wine. He tossed the menu onto the table and leaned back, spreading his arms wide. He proclaimed his new fine dining fusion restaurant would completely revolutionize the city. He boasted his unique culinary vision would make him the absolute king of the Chicago culinary scene. He talked endlessly about flavor profiles and VIP tasting menus. It was a spectacular performance coming from a man who burned scrambled eggs. He spun a tale of inevitable wealth and fame. When the waiter brought the drinks, Trey casually pushed the appetizers toward my side of the table. He fully expected me to pick up the check exactly as I had done for every family gathering over the past 5 years. He was dining like a king on the stolen dime of the very woman he was actively betraying. I watched them feast. They devoured the expensive meat and drank the premium wine with ravenous enthusiasm. Rachel loudly discussed the expensive interior decor she planned to purchase for the restaurant. Richard and Beatrice nodded along, offering useless business advice gleaned from television shows. Liam played the benevolent patriarch, offering Trey encouraging words about commercial entrepreneurship. It was a grotesque display of collective delusion. They were eating my money, celebrating the theft of my funds, and laughing in my face. My heart rate remained completely steady. The burning anger from the train had solidified into a block of absolute ice. The dinner stretched on for 2 agonizing hours. Finally, the waiter approached our table carrying a black leather folder. As expected, Liam made no move to reach for it. Trey was conveniently looking the other way, engrossed in a story about future Michelin stars. Beatrice and Richard were busy admiring the dessert menu. I reached across the tablecloth and pulled the folder toward me. I opened it and glanced at the bottom line. The total came to exactly $1,200. It was an astronomical amount for a weekend dinner, but it was a drop in the bucket compared to what they were attempting to steal from my future. I pulled my corporate card from my wallet and placed it neatly over the receipt. The waiter nodded and walked away to process the transaction. As I waited for the receipt to be returned, a distinct vibration pulsed against my thigh. I reached into my purse and pulled out my personal phone. It was not a text message or a standard email notification. It was a specialized security alert. Yesterday, I had carefully and secretly installed a highly sophisticated spyware program onto Liam's personal laptop while he showered. I needed absolute visibility into his digital movements at home during this critical phase. The flashing alert indicated that a new document had just been downloaded onto his hard drive. I tapped the notification, entering my security key to view the intercepted data logs. The file name appeared in stark white letters against the dark background of the tracking application. He had just successfully downloaded a PDF document titled Second Mortgage Application. I stared at the harsh glowing text on my screen for a long moment. The trap was rapidly closing. The drive back from the steakhouse was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Liam held my hand in the back of the luxury sedan, his thumb tracing soothing circles over my knuckles, while his mind undoubtedly calculated the exact timeline of my financial ruin. I played the exhausted executive perfectly. I rested my head against the cool leather seat, claiming the heavy dinner and the expensive wine had finally caught up with my demanding work schedule. We entered our brownstone, and within 45 minutes, the steady, rhythmic sound of Liam breathing heavily filled our master bedroom. He was in a deep sleep, completely sedated by the sheer arrogance of his own perceived brilliance. I slipped out from under the heavy down comforter, my bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. I bypassed the main hallway and moved silently into my private home office. I closed the solid oak door behind me, ensuring the locking mechanism did not click loudly. I did not turn on the overhead lights. The only illumination came from the sharp blue glow of my secure laptop screen as I booted up the system and accessed the remote spyware dashboard. The intercepted file was waiting for me in the secured digital vault. I opened the document titled Second Mortgage Application. The sheer audacity of the paperwork practically burned my eyes. Liam had initiated a massive equity extraction against our primary residence. But this was not just any shared property. This brownstone was my exclusive premarital asset, a $1.2 million estate I had purchased entirely with my own corporate dividends 3 years before Liam ever placed a ring on my finger. He had no legal claim to the deed. Yet there, on the second page of the digital document, was a meticulously forged signature. My signature. He had flawlessly replicated my handwriting to illegally add his name to the property title and apply for a massive $500,000 cash-out refinance. He was attempting to pull $500,000 of hard liquid cash straight from the walls of the home I built. My eyes scanned the incredibly detailed loan disbursement instructions. He was not just stealing the funds. He had a highly specific, calculated distribution strategy already established with the lending institution. I traced the routing numbers attached to the designated receiving accounts. The first wire transfer totaling $250,000 was scheduled to hit an escrow account managed by a premium real estate brokerage specializing in downtown high-rises. I cross-referenced the broker information with a quick corporate database search. The funds were locked in as a massive down payment for a luxury penthouse condo in one of the most exclusive zip codes in the city. The primary listed resident for this new luxury property was Monica. He was using the equity from my home to buy his mistress and his illegitimate 3-year-old son a spectacular sky-high fortress. The remaining $250,000 was explicitly routed to a newly formed commercial bank account. The registered business entity was named King's Culinary Group. This was Trey's absolute fantasy of a restaurant. Liam was systematically draining every ounce of my personal wealth to simultaneously finance his brother-in-law's fake hospitality empire and purchase a lavish lifestyle for his secret second family. I pulled up the corporate registration filings for the limited liability company online. Trey was listed as the sole proprietor, but Liam was documented as the primary financial guarantor. They had structured the business entity to shield Liam from operational liability while granting him total access to the incoming stolen capital. It was a textbook money laundering setup designed by someone who thought they were far smarter than the federal government. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, the cold leather pressing against my spine. A bizarre sense of absolute clarity washed over me. I dug deeper into the hidden financial ledgers I had cloned from his phone. I needed to see his complete exit strategy. If he successfully pulled $500,000 in fraudulent equity, he would not stick around to wait for the inevitable bank audits. I opened a folder containing his recent credit card statements. A massive outgoing payment caught my immediate attention. It was a $40,000 wire transfer labeled simply as legal retainer. I copied the payee routing information and ran it through the State Bar Association registry. The account belonged to a notorious family law firm in downtown Chicago. The lead partner was a ruthless divorce attorney famous for executing hostile asset seizures and leaving spouses completely destitute. The entire puzzle snapped together with terrifying perfection. Liam had mapped out my complete destruction down to the very last hour. He planned to forge the mortgage documents, wait for the $500,000 loan to clear, wire the cash directly to Monica and Trey, and then immediately serve me with aggressive divorce papers before the bank ever realized the signatures were fake. By the time the federal lending institutions caught the fraud, the money would be completely untraceable, shifted through offshore corporate accounts, and I would be left fighting a massive legal battle just to keep the roof over my head. He was going to strip me down to nothing, leaving me financially ruined and publicly humiliated while he walked away with his golden child and the absolute admiration of his parasitic family. He truly believed I would just roll over and accept total defeat. He assumed the shock of the affair and the sudden financial collapse would leave me completely paralyzed. In his mind, I was just a naive workaholic who would blindly sign away my entire life out of sheer panic and emotional devastation. I stared at the glowing screen, my hands resting perfectly still on the glass desk. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal was no longer just hurtful. It was insulting to my intelligence. He genuinely thought a woman who built a multi-million-dollar data empire could be dismantled by a mid-level financial consultant wielding a forged loan document. He thought he was playing chess, but he did not even realize he was already a pawn on my board. Every move he made from this point forward would only secure his permanent place in a federal prison cell. A sudden sharp sound shattered the absolute silence of the room. The brass handle of my office door slowly turned. The heavy oak hinges let out a low, agonizing creak that echoed loudly in the dark space. I instantly minimized the financial applications, leaving only a blank spreadsheet open on the monitor. The door swung open, casting a long, distorted shadow across the hardwood floor. Liam stood perfectly still in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the hallway light. He was wearing his gray sweatpants, rubbing his eyes and squinting into the dark room. He shifted his weight, his voice rough and groggy from sleep. "What are you doing up so late, babe?" I kept my hands completely steady, letting my fingers glide effortlessly across the trackpad. With a swift, practiced motion, I swiped away the secure desktop environment and brought my dummy spreadsheet to the forefront of the glowing monitor. I turned my head slowly, letting a soft, apologetic smile touch my lips. "Just finalizing some tax reports," I whispered, keeping my voice gentle and perfectly pitched to match the quiet atmosphere of the late-night house. You know how aggressive the board gets right before the end of the fiscal quarter. I just wanted to get ahead of the revenue projections before my morning meetings. Liam leaned against the wooden doorframe, rubbing the back of his neck. He let out a dramatic, sympathetic sigh, playing the role of the deeply concerned partner to absolute perfection. He walked up behind my chair, placing his heavy hands on my shoulders and kneading the tense muscles there. "You work way too hard, Claire," he murmured, kissing the top of my head. "The company will survive if you get a full 8 hours of sleep. Come back to bed. You are going to burn yourself out at this rate." The sheer hypocrisy of his words made my stomach churn. He was actively standing over my shoulder, pretending to care about my physical well-being, while simultaneously orchestrating a plot to steal $500,000 and leave me homeless. I closed the laptop with a soft click, stood up, and leaned into his chest. I wrapped my arms around his waist, resting my cheek against the soft cotton of his shirt. "You are right," I said softly. "Let us go to sleep." I walked back down the dark hallway with the man who was actively plotting my total destruction. I climbed into our expensive king-size bed, pulled the heavy duvet over my shoulders, and lay perfectly still in the dark. I listened to his breathing slow down and deepen. He fell asleep within minutes, completely unbothered by his own treachery. I stayed awake until dawn, my mind racing with legal statutes, federal fraud definitions, and the exact timeline of my counterattack. The next morning unfolded like a carefully choreographed stage play. I walked into the kitchen wearing a crisp white blouse and a tailored black skirt, projecting the image of a woman entirely consumed by corporate responsibilities. Liam was already dressed in his sharp gray suit. He was standing by the espresso machine humming a cheerful tune. He turned around as I entered, a bright, overly enthusiastic smile plastered across his face. "Morning beautiful," he said, handing me a steaming mug of perfectly brewed coffee. He had even added the exact splash of oat milk I preferred. It was a terrifyingly good performance. Before I could even take my first sip, he casually reached onto the marble kitchen island and picked up a thick stack of printed documents. He tapped the edges against the counter to align them, executing a practiced nonchalant shrug. "Hey, my accountant needs you to sign these tax disclosures for our joint filings," he said, his tone light and breezy. "Just standard routine stuff. We need to get them expedited before the weekend so we do not face any late penalties. I tabbed all the signature lines for you to make it quick." He handed the stack of papers to me along with a heavy silver pen. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms and taking a slow sip of his own coffee. He was trying so desperately to look relaxed, but I could see the tiny pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat. His knuckles were white from gripping his mug too tightly. This was his 0 hour. This was the moment his entire massive financial heist rested upon. I placed my coffee mug down on the counter and took the documents. I let out an exasperated sigh, playing the annoyed, overworked executive who hated dealing with domestic paperwork. "Can this not wait until tonight?" I asked, flipping casually to the second page. "I have a massive conference call in 45 minutes. Liam chuckled nervously, shifting his weight from his left foot to his right. "Come on, Claire, it will take 2 seconds. You know how annoying the accounting department gets. Just initial where the yellow sticky notes are." I nodded, looking down at the crisp white pages. I began flipping through the stack slowly, methodically. The first 3 pages were entirely legitimate. They were standard tax documents, federal disclosure forms, and basic joint filing agreements. It was the perfect boring camouflage. But I knew exactly what to look for. I turned to page 6. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, hidden beneath a generic-looking cover sheet. My heart turned to absolute ice. There it was, buried right in the middle of the stack. A sweeping, comprehensive power of attorney document. If I signed it, I would be legally granting him total unrestricted control over my personal assets, my business holdings, and my bank accounts. I kept my facial expression completely blank, portraying utter boredom as I flipped to page 8. The audacity of this man was breathtaking. Sitting right behind the power of attorney was the signature page for the massive home equity loan application. It was the final authorization required by the bank to pull $500,000 in cash directly out of the equity of my premarital brownstone. The exact funds he planned to wire to Trey's fake restaurant and Monica's luxury real estate broker. He was standing 2 feet away from me, casually drinking his coffee, waiting for me to legally hand him the weapon he would use to execute me. He thought my corporate exhaustion would blind me to the fine print. He thought I was just a rich, gullible fool. I reached the final page. Liam stepped closer, pointing his finger directly at the bottom line marked by a bright yellow sticky note. "Just right there at the bottom," he said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. "And then one more initial on the previous page." I gripped the heavy silver pen in my right hand. The weight of the metal felt grounding. I did not rush. I let the silence in the kitchen stretch out for 5 agonizing seconds. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to feel the excruciating tension of the moment. I slowly lifted my head and looked Liam dead in the eye. His smile wavered slightly, a microscopic flash of sheer terror passing behind his dark pupils. He was holding his breath, waiting to see if his entire house of cards was about to collapse. I held his gaze with a look of absolute unwavering affection. Then I pressed the ink to the paper. I did not sign my actual name. To the untrained eye, the looping cursive across the bottom of the home equity loan and the power of attorney document looked exactly like my standard corporate signature. But it was a meticulously crafted fake. 4 years ago, when my company was finalizing a highly sensitive merger, my corporate security team brought in a former federal forensic handwriting expert. He taught me how to create a duress signature, a highly specific, distinctively altered version of my handwriting, designed exclusively for fraudulent contracts or forced agreements. I altered the sharp angle of the capital C, disconnected the fluid loop of the lowercase l, and completely changed the pressure mapping on the final lettering. Any certified forensic document examiner would take one glance under high magnification and instantly declare it a forgery. It is legally provable as a fraudulent signature in any federal court in the United States. I initialed the yellow sticky notes and signed the final page with this exact, heavily flawed script. I handed the thick stack of papers back to Liam. He took the documents from my hand. I watched his chest rise and fall as he quickly flipped to the back page to verify the dark blue ink. A massive, visible wave of relief washed over his entire body. The tight lines of anxiety around his mouth instantly vanished. He beamed at me, leaning in to kiss my cheek with profound enthusiasm. He told me I was the best, and that he would drop these off with the accountant before his morning stand-up meeting. He grabbed his Italian leather briefcase and practically sprinted out the front door, eager to finalize his grand theft. He was acting like a man who had just won the lottery, completely oblivious to the fact that he had just handed me the rope to hang him with. I walked to the kitchen sink, poured the remaining coffee down the drain, and went upstairs to change into my sharpest suit. I had a very different kind of meeting to attend. I bypassed my corporate headquarters and drove straight into the heart of downtown Chicago. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a sleek, modern glass high-rise located in the financial district. I took the private elevator up to the 60th floor, stepping into the austere, minimalist reception area of the city's most ruthless financial law firm. I was not there for a standard divorce consultation. I was there to see Diana. Diana is 45 years old, a former federal prosecutor turned elite corporate attorney who specializes exclusively in complex financial crimes, racketeering, and aggressive asset recovery. She spent a decade putting white-collar criminals behind bars for the Department of Justice before moving to the private sector. She is cold-blooded, fiercely intelligent, and views the American legal system as a strategic chessboard where she absolutely refuses to lose. Her office was a massive corner suite with panoramic views of Lake Michigan, completely devoid of personal photographs or warm decorations. It was a room designed solely for executing corporate casualties. I sat in the stiff leather chair across from her custom steel desk and handed over the encrypted flash drive containing the cloned contents of Liam's phone. I also slid across high-resolution photographs I had taken of the loan documents and the power of attorney before handing them back to him. Diana plugged the drive into her secure terminal. I sat in absolute silence as she methodically reviewed the audio recording of Rachel demanding the stolen funds, the photographs of the secret 3-year-old child, and the intercepted PDF of the $500,000 second mortgage application. Her sharp dark eyes scanned the glowing screen. She did not display an ounce of shock, anger, or pity. Instead, a slow, terrifyingly predatory smile spread across her face. She saw the exact same legal angles I did. The trap was now fully operational, and Liam was blindly walking right into the center of the kill zone. Diana leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. She looked at me with absolute professional admiration. She explained the legal reality of my situation with clinical precision. She told me that if I stopped him today, if I walked into a standard family law clinic to file for separation, this would just be a messy, drawn-out divorce. Family court judges in Illinois see infidelity and hidden assets every single day. He would hire a sleazy lawyer, claim my business funds were marital property, and demand spousal support. He might get a slap on the wrist for moving money around, but he would ultimately walk away with a significant portion of the wealth I built. Diana leaned forward, her voice dropping to a sharp, commanding tone, but she explained if I let him take those documents and submit them to a federally insured lending institution, the entire landscape shifts drastically. The moment he transmits that forged application across banking networks to extract $500,000, he crosses state lines digitally. It elevates from a standard domestic dispute directly into a federal felony. We were going to let him commit wire fraud and bank fraud under Title 18 of the United States Code. We were going to let him lock himself inside a maximum security federal prison cell. But first, we absolutely needed to ensure the physical asset he was trying to leverage was completely untouchable and shielded from any external financial claims. Diana reached into her heavy steel filing cabinet and pulled out a massive, meticulously tabbed binder. She dropped it onto the desk between us with a resounding thud. It contained the complete legal framework to establish an irrevocable blind trust. She slid a titanium pen across the glass surface toward my waiting hand, her predatory smile returning to her face. Let us make sure that when he tries to steal the house, he is actually stealing from a federally protected entity. I slowly took the heavy titanium pen from Diana and finally began signing my name. This time, I deliberately used my real legally binding signature. We spent the next 4 hours executing a massive and complex financial restructuring. Diana moved with the precision of a surgeon. First, we tackled the deed to the $1.2 million brownstone. We executed a quitclaim deed completely transferring the property from my individual name directly into the newly established irrevocable blind trust. The exact moment the certified notary firmly stamped the formal document, the entire house legally vanished from my personal portfolio. Next, we moved to my corporate assets. As the sole founder and chief executive officer of my data analytics firm, I held 90% of the controlling shares. We restructured the corporate hierarchy, placing my entire equity stake into the protective shell of the trust. We then systematically and ruthlessly targeted my liquid capital. Every high-yield savings account, every mutual fund, and every private investment portfolio was aggressively liquidated and routed into the trust's heavily fortified federal accounts. Diana set up an independent fiduciary to manage the trust, meaning I officially relinquished all direct control over my own wealth. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the transformation was totally complete. On paper, I was completely destitute. I owned absolutely nothing. I was just an employee collecting a modest salary. If Liam tried to sue me for alimony or claim half of my assets in a divorce settlement, his sleazy lawyer would find empty bank accounts and 0 property deeds. He was preparing to steal from a woman who, financially speaking, simply did not exist anymore. I thanked Diana, packed the copies of the trust documents into my leather briefcase, and headed back to my downtown corporate office. The real show was about to begin. I sat at my glass desk and opened my secure administrative banking portal. I had given Liam limited access to a secondary corporate operating account years ago so he could manage minor household expenses without bothering my accounting team. He had kept his activity minimal and completely unsuspicious until now. I kept the banking dashboard open on my secondary monitor while I reviewed data models on my primary screen. I knew he was going to make his move today. Rachel had explicitly demanded the funds on the morning train ride, and Liam was terrified of disappointing his demanding sister and his impatient mistress. At precisely 3:14 in the afternoon, a bright red notification banner flashed across the top right corner of my screen. A new outbound wire transfer had been successfully initiated. I clicked on the alert to view the detailed transaction logs. The fully authorized user was officially listed as Liam. The total transfer amount was exactly $150,000. The designated receiving account belonged to King's Culinary Group, the fraudulent limited liability company registered entirely to my brother-in-law Trey. I watched the status indicator shift from pending to processing and finally to completed. The funds were gone. He had actually done it. He had crossed the line from a cheating, deceitful husband into a literal corporate embezzler. He had just stolen federal funds across state lines to finance a fake fine dining fusion restaurant for a man who possessed absolutely 0 culinary skills. My chest swelled with a dark, triumphant energy. He took the bait perfectly. Any normal business owner would immediately panic, freeze the accounts, and call their spouse screaming about the missing money. I did the exact opposite. I picked up my office phone and dialed the direct emergency line for my corporate banking liaison. I identified myself using my secure merchant codes and informed the bank representative that I had just detected a massive unauthorized wire transfer originating from a compromised access point. I explicitly instructed the bank not to reverse the transaction or alert the recipient. Instead, I formally requested that they flag the compromised operating account as a designated honeypot for an ongoing internal fraud investigation. The bank immediately locked down the account architecture, placing specialized tracking tags on the outgoing routing numbers. But I was not finished. My next call was to the regional office of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Using the legal framework Diana had prepared for me earlier that morning, I filed an official corporate fraud report. I provided the federal agents with the exact routing numbers, the receiving business entity details, and my strong suspicion of aggressive money laundering. I explained that an unauthorized user was actively moving stolen corporate capital into a newly formed hospitality business. The federal agents took the report with extreme seriousness. Liam and Trey were no longer just moving stolen cash. They were officially in possession of flagged federal funds, and the government was now quietly tracking every single dollar they spent. I leaned back in my chair and took a slow, deep breath. The steel trap was now fully operational. I picked up my personal phone and opened Instagram. I did not have to scroll very far. Trey had just posted a brand new video to his public story. I tapped the active comment section at the bottom of the glowing screen. I watched my brother-in-law celebrate his stolen victory. The video showed Trey standing inside a massive empty commercial space with exposed brick walls and high industrial ceilings. He was wearing a ridiculously expensive suit, clearly purchased with my money. He shook a bottle of premium champagne and popped the cork, letting the expensive alcohol spray all over the concrete floor. He yelled into the camera about making his wild dreams reality and becoming the ultimate king of the Chicago restaurant scene. Rachel was cheering loudly in the background. I stared at his arrogant, joyful face. He had absolutely no idea that the federal government was already watching him. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with absolute precision. I typed my message. "So proud of you, Trey. Big things coming." I pressed send and placed my phone down on the heavy glass desk. The digital snare was perfectly set for my husband and his arrogant brother-in-law. They were currently celebrating a monumental victory, completely oblivious to the federal tracking tags attached to every single dollar they spent. Now I needed to focus on the final piece of this pathetic puzzle. I needed Monica. The bank fraud and wire fraud charges would easily destroy Liam and Trey forever. However, I wanted to ensure the mistress who knowingly participated in the theft of my premarital assets faced absolute ruin alongside them in a federal courtroom. I required direct evidence of her active complicity in this scheme. If I could fully prove she knew the funds were illegally extracted from my personal wealth, federal prosecutors would eagerly drag her into the grand jury indictment. I reached out to a private investigator named Gavin, a former intelligence officer known for absolute discretion and ruthless efficiency. I handed him untraceable cash and a single photograph of Monica extracted from Liam's hidden digital vault. I gave Gavin one strict directive. I needed her daily routine mapped out to the exact minute every single day. Within 48 hours, Gavin delivered a highly comprehensive digital dossier directly to my encrypted email. He tracked her movements with terrifying precision. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she dropped the 3-year-old boy off at an elite private preschool. Immediately after the drop-off, she spent exactly 2 hours browsing an incredibly exclusive baby boutique in the wealthy Gold Coast neighborhood. She always followed her shopping with a prolonged visit to the artisanal cafe right next door. She lived a life of total leisure while I worked grueling 80-hour weeks. Thursday morning arrived with a sharp, biting chill in the downtown Chicago air. I prepared for my upcoming performance meticulously. I dressed in an immaculate white cashmere coat, draped elegantly over a tailored beige designer dress. I paired the outfit with a rare leather handbag and subtle, highly expensive jewelry. I projected the exact image of a woman possessing massive amounts of disposable income. I instructed my private driver to drop me off a block away from the boutique. I walked through the heavy glass doors of the store at exactly 10:15. The retail space smelled heavily of organic lavender and expensive imported fabrics. I spotted Monica almost immediately. She was standing near the back display, running her hands over an overpriced cashmere stroller blanket. She wore brand new designer activewear clearly purchased with Liam's stolen credit cards. I approached her slowly, pretending to browse an adjacent rack of imported infant clothing. I picked up a small silk sweater and held it up to the light. I turned to Monica with a polite, sophisticated smile and initiated a casual conversation. I complimented her impeccable fashion sense and asked if she knew whether the silk garments held up well in the wash. She eagerly engaged, visibly flattered that a wealthy woman was asking for her personal advice. Within 5 minutes, we were chatting like old friends. I shifted the narrative, introducing myself as an independent angel investor. I told her I specialized in funding entrepreneurial mothers who wanted to launch luxury lifestyle brands. I watched her dark eyes widen with pure greed. She practically vibrated with excitement. She immediately started talking about her lifelong dream of designing a high-end children's clothing line. She practically begged me to join her for coffee next door to discuss her brilliant business concepts. I graciously accepted her invitation. We walked into the bustling cafe and secured a quiet, isolated table in the far corner. I ordered a simple black espresso. She ordered a highly complicated iced vanilla latte. I placed my designer handbag squarely on the table between us. I had already activated the recording application on my phone, leaving the microphone perfectly positioned near the slightly open zipper. The device was actively capturing every single sound in pristine 4K audio. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, projecting intense professional interest. I guided the conversation with surgical precision. I asked her about her background, her lifestyle, and how she planned to fund the initial startup costs for her proposed brand before securing outside investment. She took the bait with astonishing arrogance. She leaned close, completely eager to impress a potential wealthy benefactor. She boasted about her incredibly successful partner, painting a picture of a man who controlled massive amounts of capital. She said her boyfriend was a top-tier finance executive who managed huge portfolios. I raised an eyebrow, feigning impressed curiosity. I asked her if her wealthy boyfriend was willing to finance her new business venture. She let out a loud, confident laugh, waving her manicured hand dismissively. She said he would give her anything she wanted. She leaned even closer across the small table, her voice dripping with smug superiority. She told me she did not need to worry about startup capital because a massive influx of cash was already on the way. She looked me right in the eyes and delivered the exact confession I needed. He is divorcing his workaholic wife, Monica boasted, proudly stirring her iced latte with her green plastic straw. He is taking equity out of her oversized mansion to buy me a penthouse next month. He says she is completely clueless about money, so she will not even notice the cash is gone until the ink on the divorce papers is already dry. I kept my expression perfectly composed. The recording app inside my bag captured every single syllable of her malicious confession. She had just admitted to possessing advanced knowledge of a federal bank fraud scheme. She knew the funds were stolen and she eagerly anticipated the illegal proceeds. I looked at her perfectly styled hair and naive smile. Wow, she must be really stupid to let him do that to her, I replied with a smile. Monica laughed, tossing her dark hair. She agreed with my assessment of the clueless wife. We finished our coffees and I promised to review her fictional business plan once drafted. I stood up, retrieved my handbag holding the damning recording, and walked into the brisk Chicago air. The final piece of the federal indictment was now safely in my possession. 3 days later, I was standing in the foyer of my brownstone sorting the afternoon mail. Among the usual corporate magazines and utility bills was a massive envelope made of midnight black cardstock. The calligraphy on the front was stamped in gold foil. I broke the wax seal and pulled out the invitation. It was a formal, wildly pretentious announcement for the grand opening of King's Culinary Group. Trey and Rachel were officially launching their restaurant this upcoming weekend. The invitation boasted about an exclusive VIP tasting menu, a red carpet arrival, and premium champagne toasts. I stared at the expensive cardstock, calculating exactly how much of my stolen corporate capital they had wasted on a boutique printing company. My personal phone vibrated in my pocket. The caller identification displayed Richard and Beatrice. I accepted the call and held the phone to my ear, bracing myself for another round of their insufferable entitlement. Claire Beatrice barked through the speaker, bypassing any polite greeting. We just received the final guest list for Trey and Rachel's grand opening. I noticed you and Liam are seated at the primary VIP table. Yes, I replied evenly. I just opened the invitation. Good, Beatrice continued, her tone sharp and demanding. Richard and I called to discuss your financial contribution. Since Trey is family, we expect you to write a $50,000 check as a grand opening gift. I stood perfectly still, letting the sheer absurdity of her demand wash over me. I asked her to repeat the amount. $50,000, Richard chimed in from the background, clearly listening on speakerphone. It is standard for family to provide a financial blessing for a new commercial enterprise. Beatrice let out a condescending sigh. Honestly, Claire, it is the absolute least you can do. Considering how much Liam supports your little data hobby, you owe this family some actual gratitude. Liam works his fingers to the bone in the finance sector to keep a roof over your head. It is time you finally contribute something meaningful to his sister's future. They were demanding I hand over $50,000 in clean cash to supplement the $150,000 their son had already embezzled from my company. The level of delusional arrogance was almost cinematic. I kept my voice incredibly calm. I am afraid that will not be possible, Beatrice. My capital is completely tied up in corporate restructuring right now. I will not be writing a check for Trey's restaurant. The line went dead silent. Beatrice gasped loudly, clearly outraged by the rejection. You selfish, ungrateful girl, she hissed. I am calling Liam right now. She slammed the phone down. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of sparkling water, and waited. The fallout took exactly 4 hours to arrive. The front door burst open at 6 o'clock in the evening. Liam stormed into the house, slamming the heavy oak door so hard the framed mirrors in the hallway rattled. He marched directly into the kitchen. His face was flushed red with absolute fury. His tie was loosened and his briefcase hit the marble island with a violent thud. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "What is wrong with you?" he screamed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. My mother just called me in tears. She said you disrespected her and flat out refused to help Trey and Rachel with their opening. I remained seated on the velvet bar stool. I told your mother I do not have $50,000 in liquid cash to hand out as a party favor, Liam. That is not disrespect. That is a financial reality. Liam slammed his hands down on the countertop, leaning over the marble to intimidate me. You are completely unbelievable, he yelled, launching into a textbook gaslighting routine. You make everything about you and your stupid spreadsheets. You are entirely selfish, Claire. You have no concept of loyalty. Family always comes first. My family has accepted you with open arms, and the second they ask for a tiny bit of support, you hoard your money like a greedy sociopath. I watched the vein bulging in his neck. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, desperately trying to manipulate me into guilt. He needed that $50,000 because his offshore money laundering scheme was running into friction, and Trey was burning through the stolen cash faster than anticipated. I am not writing the check, I stated, coldly, refusing to break eye contact. Liam threw his hands in the air, letting out a loud, dramatic groan of utter disgust. You are a cold, miserable woman, he spat, backing away from the island. I cannot even look at you right now. I cannot be in the same house as someone who treats my flesh and blood with such utter contempt. He stormed over to the hall closet, yanking his expensive leather duffel bag off the top shelf. He shoved a fresh suit, a clean shirt, and his shaving kit into the bag. He zipped it shut with violent aggression. I am going to sleep at the office tonight, he announced, his voice dripping with venom. Do not wait up. He turned on his heel and marched out the front door, slamming it shut behind him. The house fell into absolute silence. I sat alone in the kitchen, completely unfazed by his theatrical exit. I opened my secure laptop and pulled up the GPS tracking software I had installed on his phone. A bright green dot blinked on the digital map of Chicago. I watched the green dot move rapidly away from our neighborhood. It did not head toward the financial district where his corporate office was located. It did not go anywhere near his office building. Instead, the green dot traveled straight up the highway, exiting near the Gold Coast. It moved steadily down the luxury residential block and came to a complete stop right outside a familiar high-rise building. I smiled, closing my laptop. He had gone straight to Monica's apartment. The trap was now fully operational and executing flawlessly. This was exactly what Diana and I had planned. Perfect. The following 48 hours moved with the lethal precision of a ticking time bomb. I did not confront Liam about his night at Monica's apartment. Instead, I drove straight back to the financial district the very next morning. Diana sat behind her massive steel desk, but this time she was not alone. Two men in sharp, unassuming gray suits sat in the leather chairs opposite her. They introduced themselves firmly as special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The trap I had laid was no longer just a private corporate matter. It had officially escalated into a massive federal operation. Diana handed me a thick, redacted file. The agents confirmed that my flagged honeypot account had successfully triggered every single federal alarm in their system. The funds had bounced from my corporate operating account across state lines through a flagged routing server before finally landing in Trey's commercial business account. That constituted textbook wire fraud and aggressive money laundering. But the federal agents were even more interested in the second piece of the puzzle, the $500,000 home equity loan. Liam had officially submitted the forged documents to the National Bank. By legally submitting that forged document to a federally insured institution, Liam had committed federal bank fraud. The agents informed me that the funds were scheduled to disperse on Friday morning, exactly 24 hours before Trey's grand restaurant opening. They had enough concrete evidence to secure a grand jury indictment and execute immediate arrest warrants. Diana looked at me with a cold, predatory gleam in her eyes. She confirmed that the federal agents would be attending the restaurant launch in person to execute the warrants. The house of cards was about to violently collapse on top of them. I returned to my brownstone that afternoon, mentally preparing myself for the final act of this exhausting charade. The front door unlocked, and Liam walked in, looking deliberately disheveled. He was playing the role of the exhausted, misunderstood husband to absolute perfection. He acted as though he had spent a miserable night tossing and turning on a rigid office sofa rather than sleeping in the luxurious bed of his mistress. He walked slowly into the kitchen, where I was pouring a glass of sparkling water. He let out a long, heavy sigh, engineered to elicit immediate sympathy. He approached me with a pathetic hangdog expression, wrapping his arms around my waist and resting his chin on my shoulder. "I am so sorry for losing my temper last night, Claire," he murmured, his voice dripping with fake contrition. "I have just been under a massive amount of pressure at work. You know how hard I push myself to provide for this family. Sometimes the stress just boils over, and I take it out on the person I love the most. I know Trey and Rachel ask for a lot, and I was wrong to yell at you for setting boundaries. Can you please forgive me?" I turned around in his arms and rested my hands gently on his chest. I looked up at him with wide, apologetic eyes, playing the submissive, deeply remorseful wife he desperately needed me to be. I told him I understood completely and that I was sorry for being so stubborn about the money. I stroked his ego with surgical precision, telling him how much I appreciated his hard work and how lucky I was to have a husband who cared so deeply about his family. Liam soaked up the validation like a dying man drinking water. A smug, triumphant smile briefly flashed across his face before he masked it with renewed affection. He kissed my forehead and stepped back casually, adjusting his shirt cuffs. "By the way," he added, keeping his tone incredibly light and breezy, "my bank finally approved some new financial restructuring I have been working on for our portfolio. We are about to see a massive influx of liquidity. Once the dust settles in a few weeks, I want to take you on a romantic vacation. Just the two of us, maybe a month in Italy or the south of France. We deserve a break from all this chaos." The sheer audacity of his lie was almost poetic. He was talking about the $500,000 fraudulent mortgage clearing. He was using the promise of a lavish European vacation to keep me completely docile while he prepared to serve me with aggressive divorce papers and leave me entirely bankrupt. I smiled warmly, telling him that a trip to Italy sounded like an absolute dream. He kissed me one last time before heading upstairs to shower off the scent of his mistress. With Liam successfully placated, I had one final task to complete before the grand opening. I drove my car to the magnificent mile, navigating the bustling sidewalks, until I reached the most exclusive designer boutique in the city. I bypassed the racks of conservative business suits and neutral evening wear. I was not attending this event as a corporate executive or an obedient spouse. I was attending as an executioner. I walked directly to the formal wear section and pulled a stunning floor-length silk dress from the display. It was not a subtle color. It was a deep, striking, unapologetic blood red. I stepped into the private fitting room and zipped the dress up. The garment hugged my frame perfectly, radiating absolute power and total control. It was a dress specifically designed to command the entire room, a stunning dress that demanded absolute attention and offered zero apologies. I purchased the expensive garment in physical cash to ensure absolute secrecy and carried the heavy black garment bag all the way back to my waiting vehicle. I hung the beautiful red dress carefully in my private closet, running my fingers over the smooth silk one last time. It was the perfect outfit for a slaughter. The evening of the grand opening arrived, bringing an electric current that crackled in the air of our brownstone. I stood perfectly still in front of my vanity mirror, studying my reflection with the cold detachment of a general. The blood-red silk dress draped flawlessly across my frame. It was a garment woven from pure defiance, catching the ambient light with every subtle movement. I held a tube of deep crimson lipstick, tracing the sharp outline of my lips with absolute surgical precision. There was no room for error tonight, not a single smudged edge. My appearance had to project an impenetrable armor of absolute control. Down the hallway, the heavy footsteps of my husband echoed. Liam paced frantically back and forth in his tailored black tuxedo, adjusting his silver cufflinks and checking his expensive watch every 10 seconds. He was vibrating with adrenaline and unearned pride. He felt invincible today. The fraudulent $500,000 home equity loan had officially cleared the banking systems that very morning, completely validating his disastrous delusion of supreme intelligence. In his mind, he had successfully conquered the world. He had secured the luxury penthouse for his hidden mistress, financed his brother-in-law's fake culinary empire, and outsmarted his wealthy wife. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He had no idea he was marching to his execution. "Claire, we are going to hit heavy downtown traffic if we do not leave in exactly 4 minutes," Liam yelled from the top of the staircase, his voice tight with nervous energy. "Trey wants us there early for the exclusive VIP red carpet photos. You know how important this is for my family's legacy. Hurry up." I ignored his frantic demands and turned to the sleek marble vanity top. Resting right next to my jewelry box was a thick, heavy manila envelope. This envelope was the ultimate culmination of my grueling 80-hour work weeks and my relentless forensic investigation. I opened the metal clasp and reviewed the destructive contents one final time to ensure absolute perfection. First was a stack of glossy photographs extracted directly from his hidden digital vault. The images vividly depicted the secret 3-year-old birthday party. Liam, his mistress, Monica, Rachel, Trey, Richard, and Beatrice, all smiling radiantly around a child who shared my husband's exact genetic facial structure. Second was a highly detailed financial routing document officially certified by my corporate banking liaison and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The spreadsheets clearly tracked the exact flow of the stolen $150,000 from my flagged honeypot account directly into Trey's newly established commercial business ledger. It was the undeniable paper trail of federal wire fraud and aggressive money laundering. Finally, tucked neatly at the back of the envelope was the certified forensic signature analysis report provided by my independent handwriting expert. The document legally proved that the signature on the massive home equity loan application was a deliberate, heavily flawed forgery, elevating Liam's deceit to federal bank fraud. These papers were the heavy artillery required to level their house of cards. I sealed the clasp and slid the thick envelope directly into my oversized structured black leather designer clutch. It fit perfectly concealed from the world. I snapped the magnetic closure of the clutch shut and walked out of the master suite. As I gracefully descended the grand staircase, Liam stood waiting in the foyer. He looked up, and for a brief second his breath actually caught in his throat. The striking blood-red silk dress commanded his absolute attention. His eyes widened, completely captivated by the sheer visual power I was projecting. "Wow," he murmured, a smug, arrogant grin slowly spreading across his face as he offered his arm. "You look absolutely incredible, Claire. I am so glad you finally decided to dress up and make a real effort for my family tonight. They are going to be thrilled to see you supporting Trey's massive success." I placed my hand on his tuxedo sleeve, maintaining a perfectly composed, icy smile. "I would not miss this night for anything in the world, Liam. I promise you your family will never forget what happens this evening." He chuckled, completely missing the lethal double meaning of my words. We walked out the front door and climbed into the back of the waiting luxury town car he had rented specifically for the occasion. The drive toward the trendy commercial district was agonizingly tense, though Liam remained entirely oblivious to the atmosphere. He spent the 30-minute commute bragging loudly about Trey's incredible entrepreneurial vision and how the new restaurant was going to completely redefine Chicago's fine dining landscape. He talked endlessly about the imported ingredients, the exclusive guest list, and the brilliant financial strategy that made it all possible. I simply nodded along, staring out the tinted window at the passing city lights, my hand resting firmly over the leather clutch in my lap. The town car finally turned onto the bustling commercial avenue and slowed to a smooth halt. We pulled up directly in front of King's Culinary Group. The venue was blindingly bright, completely bathed in the glow of massive temporary spotlights. A plush red carpet stretched across the pristine sidewalk, surrounded by heavy velvet ropes and aggressive private security guards. The valet immediately rushed forward to open my door, offering a polite bow as I stepped out into the crisp evening air. Through the towering floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the restaurant, I could see the massive scale of their fraudulent celebration. Over 100 prominent guests were packed inside the luxurious space. Local social media influencers were posing for flash photography near the custom-branded entry wall. Wealthy corporate investors milled about, sipping premium champagne from crystal flutes. And right in the center of the room, holding court like absolute royalty, stood Rachel, Trey Richard, and Beatrice. They were laughing loudly, soaking up the unearned admiration. The stage was set. Liam guided me through the heavy glass doors of King's Culinary Group. The moment we stepped inside, the sheer scale of their financial recklessness washed over me. The interior was a cavernous monument to stolen wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over imported marble floors. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with caviar and pouring premium champagne into tall flutes. The air was thick with expensive cologne and the loud chatter of Chicago's social elite. I scanned the room and locked eyes on Trey. He was completely in his element, working the floor with the slick charisma of a politician. He wore a custom velvet dinner jacket that easily cost $5,000. Holding a glass of bourbon, he entertained a group of wealthy local investors. I walked close enough to catch fragments of his arrogant performance. He was loudly boasting about his relentless work ethic, claiming this restaurant was the ultimate result of his grueling self-made journey. He entirely omitted the fact that his culinary empire was built on federal wire fraud. Standing nearby was Rachel, looking like a walking advertisement for stolen credit cards. She wore a heavily beaded designer gown, but it was the jewelry that caught my attention. She was dripping in newly purchased diamonds. A glittering tennis necklace rested against her collarbone, and massive diamond drop earrings swung every time she tossed her head back to laugh. She looked incredibly smug, basking in a luxury lifestyle she had not earned a single penny to secure. Before I could process the sickening display of my embezzled funds, my in-laws descended upon us. Beatrice and Richard pushed through the crowd, their faces flushed with absolute triumph. Beatrice wore an ostentatious silver pantsuit, clutching her champagne like a scepter. Richard looked equally pompous in a black tuxedo. They immediately grabbed Liam by the shoulders, pulling him into a theatrical embrace. They acted as though he had just conquered a foreign nation. Beatrice turned her attention to a group of wealthy couples standing right behind them. These were their elite country club friends, people they desperately wanted to impress. Beatrice grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my silk sleeve, and pulled me forward. She gestured vaguely in my direction with her flute. She introduced me as Liam's wife, letting out a short, dismissive laugh before adding that I just do some computer stuff from home. The country club friends offered polite, disinterested nods before turning right back to my husband. Richard slammed a heavy hand down on Liam's back, booming with paternal pride. He loudly proclaimed to the circle of friends that Liam was the primary financial investor behind this incredible launch. He boasted that his brilliant son had single-handedly financed Trey's massive culinary dream, providing all the startup capital out of his own successful financial portfolio. Liam puffed out his chest, soaking up the unearned admiration from the wealthy crowd. He smiled modestly, claiming he simply wanted to support family because family always comes first. I stood perfectly still in my blood-red dress, my hand gripping my leather clutch. I simply smiled and took a slow, measured sip of my sparkling water. They were publicly parading my wealth as their own, actively writing me out of the financial equation while standing inside a building I had unknowingly purchased. The level of disrespect was absolutely staggering, but I refused to let my calm facade crack. The deeper they dug their hole of lies, the harder the inevitable fall would be. I watched them congratulate each other. Suddenly, the upbeat background music faded into silence. A sharp clinking sound echoed across the room. Trey was standing on the raised stage near the back of the dining area, tapping a spoon against his crystal champagne flute. The crowd immediately quieted down, turning their attention toward the stage. The grand opening speeches were about to begin. Liam grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the front row, ensuring we had the best possible view of the impending performance. Trey gripped the microphone, looking over the sea of faces. He paused, taking a deep breath to feign emotion. He began his speech by talking about his difficult journey, painting himself as an underdog who overcame massive obstacles to build this restaurant. Then his voice cracked on cue. He looked directly down at our table and pointed a shaking finger at Liam. He wiped a fake tear and told the crowd none of this would be possible without his amazing brother-in-law. He praised Liam for his unbelievable generosity, calling him the true savior of the family, who made his culinary dream a reality. The crowd erupted into loud applause. Liam beamed, raising his glass in a humble salute. The applause eventually died down, and Trey handed the microphone over to his wife. Rachel stepped up to the edge of the stage, the heavy stage lights catching the stolen diamonds draped across her neck. Her face was flushed with arrogant power. She looked out at the audience, soaking in the moment, but then her gaze shifted. Her eyes locked directly onto mine. The smug, self-satisfied smile dropped from her face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated venom. She gripped the microphone tightly. Her voice rang out through the surround sound speakers, sharp and completely malicious. She announced she wanted to give a special thanks to those who actively tried to hold them back. She stared dead into my eyes, ensuring every person in the venue followed her line of sight right to where I was standing. She declared loudly that certain people were just too stingy and too selfish to support their own family. A heavy, uncomfortable silence swept through the room as she delivered her final blow. She raised her crystal champagne glass high into the evening air and shouted that they had finally proved you do not need selfish people to succeed. The low murmur of the crowd rippled through the expansive dining room like a sudden, uncomfortable wave. A few of the wealthy corporate investors standing near the front of the stage actually chuckled, their amusement fueled by the premium champagne and the unexpected spark of family drama. The tension in the air was incredibly thick. I felt a heavy, sweating hand press firmly against my lower back. Liam leaned down, his warm, panicked breath hitting my ear. His grip was tight, almost bruising, a desperate physical command to stay perfectly in line. He whispered frantically, his voice trembling with suppressed anxiety. He begged me to just ignore her and not make a scene in front of the most important people in the city. He reminded me of the prominent influencers and the elite country club members actively watching our every single move. He desperately wanted me to swallow the blatant public disrespect, lower my head, and dutifully play the role of the submissive, humiliated wife to ensure his family's flawless public image remained completely intact. I did not ignore her. I did not lower my head. I smoothly and deliberately stepped away from Liam's bruising grasp, leaving his hand grasping at empty air. I turned and walked gracefully toward the raised stage. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my designer heels against the imported marble floor echoed clearly over the fading murmurs of the confused crowd. The sea of wealthy guests naturally parted for me, their eyes glued to the striking blood-red silk dress that flowed elegantly around my legs with every single confident step. I did not run. I did not scream or throw a childish tantrum. My entire demeanor was chillingly calm, completely devoid of any erratic or predictable emotion. I climbed the short set of stairs leading to the platform with the absolute authority of an executioner ascending a scaffold. Rachel watched my slow approach, the smug, arrogant smile rapidly faltering as deep confusion clouded her heavily made-up face. She had fully expected me to flee the restaurant in tears. She had anticipated a private hysterical breakdown in the restroom. She never once anticipated a direct, unapologetic public collision. I stepped right into her personal space, the harsh stage lights beating down on both of us. Her eyes widened in sudden terror as I reached out. I gently but firmly took the heavy microphone directly from her trembling manicured hand. She was too stunned by my absolute composure to even mount a resistance. She just stood there, her mouth slightly open, completely frozen in the glare of the spotlight. I turned to face the massive crowd. Over 100 prominent guests, local social media influencers, and elite country club members stared back at me in total deafening silence. I looked down at Liam standing in the front row. His face had completely drained of all color. He looked exactly like a man watching a massive avalanche hurtle directly toward his unprotected body. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice echoed through the high-end surround sound speakers, crisp, perfectly modulated, and absolutely lethal. "I completely agree with Rachel," I announced, letting the clear words ring out across the cavernous room. "You truly should not be selfish with family. For example, you should not be selfish with the $150,000 stolen directly from my corporate operating account to pay for this venue's commercial lease." A collective sharp intake of breath sucked all the oxygen right out of the luxurious room. The wealthy investors in the front row stopped laughing instantly. Their eyes darted in sheer panic from me to Trey and finally to Liam. I did not stop. I paced slowly across the stage, maintaining intense, unbreakable eye contact with my husband. I explained to the captivated, horrified audience that funding a spectacular culinary dream is a beautiful sentiment, provided you are actually using your own money to do it. I detailed precisely how my husband, the brilliant financial consultant everyone had just finished praising, used his unauthorized banking access to illegally wire federal funds across state lines. I publicly congratulated Trey on his self-made success, noting how incredibly easy it must be to build a massive hospitality empire from scratch when you are actively committing corporate embezzlement to cover your exorbitant overhead costs. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. The background hum of the kitchen staff had completely vanished. I looked over at Beatrice and Richard standing near the bar. My mother-in-law's jaw hung open in pure shock. The arrogant, condescending matriarch who had spent the entire evening insulting my data firm now looked like she was about to collapse onto the marble floor. I spoke directly to her, amplifying my voice so every single country club friend could hear. I thanked Beatrice for her valuable advice earlier. I agreed that Liam certainly was a hard worker, specifically when it came to laundering my corporate dividends through fake holding companies to finance this spectacular charade. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Rachel's designer jewelry, publicly estimating that her new diamond drop earrings cost roughly the equivalent of my company's quarterly software licensing fee. I exposed the absolute truth that every piece of velvet, every crystal chandelier, and every drop of premium champagne in this building was purchased with stolen capital. Guests began whispering nervously, taking immediate steps backward to distance themselves from Liam and Trey. The wealthy investors realized they were standing inside a massive crime scene. I lowered the microphone slightly, letting the sheer, crushing weight of my accusations settle heavily over the paralyzed crowd. I had just successfully dismantled their entire fabricated reality in under 60 seconds. The grand illusion of the wealthy benevolent provider and the brilliant self-made restaurateur was instantly reduced to absolute ash. I watched Trey standing near the edge of the stage. His custom velvet dinner jacket suddenly looked like a stolen costume. His arrogant posture had completely crumbled under the weight of public exposure. He stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, realizing the federal implications of my words. The room went dead silent. Trey dropped his champagne flute. It hit the imported marble floor and shattered loudly. The sharp crystalline crash of Trey's champagne flute shattering against the imported marble floor broke the absolute silence of the room. The delicate glass exploded into hundreds of glittering fragments around his expensive leather shoes. The wealthy investors standing nearest to him instantly stepped back, their faces displaying a mixture of severe alarm and profound confusion. The joyful celebratory atmosphere of the grand opening had evaporated in less than a minute, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension that held every single guest completely paralyzed. Richard lunged forward from the front row. His face was a mottled, unhealthy shade of crimson, violently clashing with the crisp white collar of his expensive tuxedo. He pointed a trembling, furious finger directly at my face, the veins in his neck bulging with unchecked, frantic rage. "Are you insane?" he bellowed, his voice cracking loudly as it echoed through the cavernous dining hall. "Get off the stage right now! You are embarrassing us!" I looked down at my father-in-law with a gaze so entirely devoid of warmth, it could have frozen the champagne resting in the nearby crystal flutes. I did not raise my voice to match his frantic hysteria. I did not flinch or step back. I simply adjusted my grip on the microphone and let a cold, placid smile touch my lips. "I am not the one who should be embarrassed, Richard. I am simply the auditor delivering the final quarterly report." I handed the microphone back to a completely petrified Rachel. She took it with shaking hands, holding the dark metal device as if it were a live grenade ready to detonate. I turned my back on my in-laws and gracefully descended the short wooden steps of the raised platform. The sea of prominent local influencers, wealthy venture capitalists, and elite country club members physically recoiled as I approached. They parted like a wave, granting me an entirely unobstructed path through the center of the room. I walked with deliberate, measured steps across the dining floor, the blood-red silk of my designer dress trailing fiercely behind me. I bypassed the panicked waitstaff and headed straight for the elevated audio-visual control station situated in the far corner of the restaurant. The hired DJ, a young man wearing heavy black headphones around his neck, stared at me in sheer terror as I purposefully invaded his workspace. I did not ask for his permission. I reached into my oversized leather clutch and pulled out my personal phone. I located the primary auxiliary input cable resting on the professional mixing board. The DJ wisely stepped back, raising his hands in a silent gesture of total surrender. I plugged my device directly into the venue's high-end projection and surround sound system. Across the dining room, Liam suddenly realized exactly what I was about to do. The smug, arrogant facade he had maintained all evening completely collapsed. He shoved his way past a group of stunned corporate sponsors desperately trying to close the distance between us. He screamed my name, his voice thick with raw, unadulterated panic, but the dense crowd of horrified guests inadvertently blocked his path. I tapped the screen of my phone. A massive 10-foot projection instantly illuminated the pristine white wall directly behind the main dining area. The high-definition image bathed the entire restaurant in a harsh, unforgiving light. It was the hidden photograph I had meticulously extracted from his digital vault just days prior. The picture displayed a lavish, incredibly expensive third birthday party hosted at a premium indoor playground facility. The crowd gasped in perfect unison. Projected right in front of them was a towering image of Liam grinning brightly and holding a small, sharply dressed toddler high upon his broad shoulders. The boy had Liam's exact jawline, his exact nose, and his unmistakably piercing eyes. It was a flawless genetic copy. But the child was only the beginning of the sheer devastation. Standing right beside my husband in the massive projection was a young, attractive woman with long, dark hair, smiling radiantly at the camera. This was Monica the mistress, whose luxury penthouse I was currently supposed to be financing with my stolen home equity. Flanking the happy, illicit couple were the rest of the parasites. Rachel and Trey were standing there completely embracing the illegitimate family. Trey, an African-American man who loved projecting an image of absolute moral superiority and high-class sophistication, was laughing joyfully in the photo, fully complicit in the ultimate betrayal. Richard and Beatrice were positioned right in the center of the frame, beaming with absolute, unadulterated joy. Beatrice, who had spent the evening looking down her nose at everyone, now leaned heavily against a cocktail table, clutching her chest, as if she had been physically struck. They were proudly celebrating a secret grandson, while I was grinding through 80-hour work weeks to fund their very existence. The collective shock in the room was dense and suffocating. The country club friends who had just praised Liam for his upstanding moral character now stared at the 10-foot projection in total disgust. They realized they were not just attending a restaurant opening funded by corporate embezzlement. They were standing in a room hosted by a man who had funded a secret second family using his wife's stolen capital, fully supported by his enabling parents and his deceitful sister and brother-in-law. The entire fabricated illusion of their wealthy, morally superior family was burned to the ground in a single undeniable photograph. Liam finally broke through the wall of guests. He lunged toward the DJ booth, his tuxedo jacket riding up his arms, his face twisted in absolute desperation. He yelled at the audiovisual technician to cut the power, demanding someone pull the plug on the massive projector. The private security guards, realizing the rapidly escalating hostility of the situation, immediately stepped in front of my husband. They pressed their strong hands against his chest, physically restraining him from reaching the control board. He thrashed against their tight grip, screaming that the photos were completely fabricated. But I was not finished. A photograph only proved their deep moral bankruptcy. I needed to prove their federal crimes to the entire room. I kept my eyes locked directly on Liam as he struggled against the security personnel. Next, I navigated seamlessly to the pristine audio file I had recorded on the morning train ride. I adjusted the main volume slider on the mixing board, pushing it to maximum capacity. I hit play. The heavy bass of the venue's surround sound system crackled for a split second before Rachel's shrill, frantic voice echoed through every single speaker in the building. The audio was crystal clear, completely drowning out Liam's desperate protests. Rachel's voice echoed through the restaurant's surround sound. "Did you wire the $150,000 yet? You better keep that idiot Claire distracted, so she does not check her company accounts. Oh, and Monica says the kid needs his private preschool tuition paid by Friday." The audio file ended with a sharp digital click. The deafening silence that followed was heavy enough to crush the breath right out of the room. For 5 agonizing seconds, absolutely no one moved. The massive high-definition projection of Liam's secret second family continued to glow brightly against the back wall, bathing the horrified audience in a harsh, unforgiving light. Then, total chaos erupted. The immaculate dining room instantly transformed into a zone of absolute social carnage. The wealthy corporate investors who had previously praised my husband's non-existent business acumen began scrambling backward, physically, retreating from the blast radius of his exposed crimes. Dozens of smartphones were immediately pulled from designer pockets and beaded evening bags. The prominent social media influencers in the front row activated their cameras, their screens glowing brightly as they live-streamed the catastrophic collapse of the culinary empire. Flashes illuminated the venue, capturing every single angle of the devastating betrayal. Beatrice realized the severe magnitude of her public destruction. The arrogant matriarch who had spent the entire evening insulting my career and parading around in her silver pantsuit could not handle the reality of her social ruin. The elite country club friends she so desperately wanted to impress were now recording her ultimate humiliation. Beatrice let out a loud theatrical gasp, clutching her chest as if her heart had suddenly stopped. She collapsed heavily into a plush velvet dining chair, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face as she faked a dramatic fainting spell to escape the relentless glare of the smartphone cameras. Richard hovered over her in a sheer state of panic, aggressively fanning her face, though his eyes darted frantically toward the exit doors. They were completely trapped in the humiliating nightmare they had helped construct. Trey realized his entire self-made millionaire persona was permanently destroyed. The fake culinary king recognized that his fraudulent empire was built entirely on stolen federal funds. The absolute sheer panic of impending legal ruin completely shattered his arrogant facade. Trey snapped. He let out a furious roar, screaming violent profanities that echoed sharply over the stunned crowd. He abandoned all pretense of high-class sophistication and charged across the imported marble floor, lunging directly toward the elevated audio-visual platform where I stood. He wildly swung his arms, threatening to smash the expensive mixing board and rip the projection cables straight from the wall. He never made it past the velvet ropes. Two heavily built private security guards intercepted his aggressive charge with brutal efficiency. They tackled my furious brother-in-law right into a tall glass cocktail table. The table tipped backward, sending dozens of crystal champagne flutes and silver trays of caviar crashing violently to the floor. The sound of breaking glass and tearing fabric filled the air. Trey's custom $5,000 velvet dinner jacket ripped loudly at the shoulder seam as the guards firmly pinned his arms behind his back, pressing his face directly into the spilled alcohol and shattered crystal. Rachel stood a few feet away, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed hysterically. The heavy diamond drop earrings she had purchased with my stolen money swung wildly against her neck as she watched her husband get completely neutralized by the venue security. Across the room, Liam watched his entire family collapse into absolute ruin. He stood completely still as the security guards held the line. Then a terrifying psychological shift washed over my husband. Seeing that his flawless public facade was permanently pulverized, Liam simply stopped caring about appearances. The panicked, desperate husband, desperately trying to protect his secret, vanished completely. In his place, the arrogant, calculating narcissist took full and total control. He smoothly brushed off the hands of the security guard standing nearest to him. He straightened his posture, rolling his shoulders back with a deeply unsettling calmness. He dropped the nice guy act entirely. Liam slowly stepped away from the chaotic crowd and walked deliberately toward the center of the main dining floor, placing himself directly beneath the glowing projection of his illegitimate son. He looked around at the flashing cameras and the horrified faces of his former colleagues. Instead of showing remorse, Liam threw his head back and let out a dark, booming laugh. It was a deeply smug, arrogant sound that sent a chill through the remaining guests. He raised his hands methodically, adjusting his silver cufflinks with an air of absolute, untouchable superiority. He looked up at the stage, his dark eyes locking onto mine with an expression of pure, unadulterated malice. He truly believed he was holding the ultimate trump card. He believed that despite this public humiliation, he had still managed to successfully execute my total financial ruin. "You think you're so smart," Liam sneered, his voice projecting loudly over the murmuring crowd, ensuring every recording device captured his arrogant declaration. "Go ahead, play your little recordings. Let everyone hear them. It doesn't matter." He paced slowly across the floor, completely owning his villainy with a sickening sense of pride. He pointed a firm finger directly at my face, ready to deliver what he confidently assumed was the final killing blow to my entire existence. "The $500,000 loan on your house cleared this morning." Liam announced, a cruel, victorious smile spreading across his face. The bank authorized the wire. The money is in an offshore account. It is completely untraceable. I filed for divorce at 4 p.m. today. My lawyer already submitted the paperwork to freeze everything else. The remaining guests gasped loudly at his brazen confession of financial theft. Liam fed on their shock, his ego inflating with every horrified stare. He crossed his arms over his tailored tuxedo jacket, looking up at me with absolute triumph. "You're getting nothing. You're out on the street, Claire." He stood there, bathed in the light of the massive projector, fully expecting me to shatter into a million pieces. He waited eagerly for me to drop to my knees and beg. He wanted the entire room to witness my total devastation as the reality of extreme bankruptcy finally crushed my calm demeanor. He had just proudly confessed to severe financial crimes in front of 100 witnesses, firmly believing the stolen cash would somehow shield him from any legal consequences. I looked down at the man I had married. I did not drop the microphone. I did not shed a single tear. I let the heavy, loaded silence stretch across the devastated restaurant, allowing his arrogant confession to permanently cement his fate. I looked at his deeply smug face, and a slow, terrifying smile spread across my lips. I leaned slightly toward the microphone, my voice dropping to a soft, lethal whisper that echoed clearly through the massive speakers. "Oh, Liam, did you really think I didn't know?" I watched the exact moment my words penetrated the thick armor of his narcissism. The arrogant tilt of his chin faltered for just a fraction of a second. He let out a harsh, dismissive scoff, trying desperately to maintain his projection of absolute control. He told me I was bluffing and that I had no idea how corporate finance actually worked. I did not argue with him. I simply reached into the oversized black leather designer clutch resting on the audio-visual mixing board. I unfastened the metal clasp of the thick manila envelope I had meticulously prepared. I pulled out a stack of heavily stamped legal documents and held the top page high in the air for the entire room to see. The harsh glare of the projector light illuminated the official seals and the bold black lettering. I spoke clearly into the microphone, ensuring every single syllable hit him with the force of a physical blow. I told him I knew exactly how corporate finance worked, which was precisely why I hired a former federal forensic handwriting expert 4 years ago. I explained to the captivated audience that corporate executives are often trained to create a duress signature. I described how it is a distinctively altered version of their normal handwriting, designed exclusively to be used when they are being forced to sign fraudulent contracts. I looked directly into Liam's rapidly widening eyes. I informed him that I deliberately altered the angle of the capital letter in my first name and completely disconnected the fluid loop of my last name. I told him any certified document examiner would take one glance at the home equity application he submitted and instantly declare it a legally provable forgery. Liam swallowed hard. His throat bobbed visibly under his expensive silk bow tie. He took a hesitant step backward, his polished leather shoes slipping slightly on the spilled champagne covering the marble floor. He tried to stammer out a defense claiming he still secured the loan, and the money was already gone. I shook my head slowly, letting a chilling laugh escape my lips. "You did not mortgage my house, Liam. I delivered the ultimate reversal with surgical precision. 2 months ago, I engaged the most ruthless financial crimes attorney in Chicago. I legally transferred the deed of that $1.2 million property into an irrevocable blind trust. I relinquished all personal ownership. On paper, I own absolutely nothing. When you forged my signature on that loan application, you were not stealing from your naive wife. You were actively attempting to leverage a federally protected asset managed by an independent fiduciary. You did not just trick a local bank, you committed federal bank fraud." The air in the restaurant grew completely stagnant. The wealthy investors in the front row began aggressively whispering to one another, instantly recognizing the severe federal mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines attached to that specific crime. Liam stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. The undeniable reality of his massive legal blunder was rapidly crushing his false reality. He had willingly handed the federal government everything they needed to lock him in a cage for a decade. Trey let out a loud, frantic gasp from his position on the floor. The private security guards were still pinning his arms behind his back, but he managed to lift his head from the shattered crystal and spilled caviar. He stared at Liam with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. Trey screamed that Liam had promised the money was completely clean. Trey yelled that Liam swore the startup capital was perfectly safe to use for the commercial lease. I turned my attention away from my paralyzed husband and focused my icy gaze entirely on my arrogant brother-in-law. I adjusted my posture, standing tall and projecting absolute authority. I told Trey he should never accept financial advice from a mid-level consultant who cheats on his wife. I pulled the second document from my stack. It was the certified tracking report provided directly by my corporate banking liaison. And regarding that $150,000 you wired to Trey this morning, I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly across the grand dining room. You did not wire those funds from my corporate operating account. The second I discovered your pathetic plan, I contacted the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. I officially surrendered control of that specific account and flagged it as a honeypot for an ongoing internal fraud investigation. I worked directly with federal agents to monitor the transaction. Liam stumbled backward, hitting a cocktail table. His legs completely gave out. He gripped the edge of the table to keep himself from collapsing onto the floor. I delivered the second lethal hit without a single ounce of mercy. You transferred flagged federal funds across state lines, I announced. The moment you clicked confirm on that transfer, you committed wire fraud. And Trey, the exact second you accepted that stolen federal cash to secure the commercial lease for this building, you committed aggressive money laundering. The federal government has been tracking every single cent you spent on these crystal chandeliers and imported marble floors. You built your entire culinary empire inside a federal trap. The smug, victorious smile that had defined Liam's entire existence vanished completely. The healthy flush of color violently drained from his face, leaving his skin an ashen, sickly gray. The realization of his absolute, inescapable destruction hit him with the force of a freight train. He was not going to a luxury offshore account. He was not moving into a high-rise penthouse with Monica. He was going to federal prison, and he had dragged his sister's husband right down into the abyss with him. Trey started hyperventilating on the floor. His chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths as sheer panic overtook his nervous system. Rachel dropped to her knees beside him, her heavy diamond earrings swinging wildly as she screamed for someone to call a doctor. Beatrice remained slumped in her chair, weeping uncontrollably into her hands while Richard stood frozen in a state of total catatonic shock. Their entire world was burning to the ground in front of 100 prominent witnesses. The heavy, suffocating silence inside the restaurant was suddenly broken by a sound coming from the busy city streets outside. It started as a faint, distant wail echoing off the tall glass skyscrapers. Within seconds, the sound grew exponentially louder, piercing through the thick glass windows of the dining room. Sirens were howling in the night air, their aggressive rhythmic alarms cutting through the tension. I watched the flashing red and blue lights begin to reflect off the imported marble floors, growing rapidly closer with every passing second. The heavy double-paned glass doors at the front entrance of King's Culinary Group did not just open. They were violently thrust apart with a force that sent a sharp gust of freezing Chicago wind rushing straight into the sweltering, panic-stricken dining room. The heavy velvet curtains near the reception desk whipped frantically in the sudden draft. The flashing red and blue emergency lights outside now poured directly through the unobstructed entryway, casting harsh alternating shadows across the imported marble floors and illuminating the terrified faces of the wealthy guests. Through that dramatic threshold stepped Diana. My corporate attorney did not wear a tactical vest or carry a weapon, yet she commanded the space with a lethal, undeniable authority. She wore a razor-sharp black suit and carried a sleek leather briefcase, walking into the chaotic restaurant with the absolute composure of an apex predator entering a familiar hunting ground. Flanking Diana, moving with highly synchronized tactical precision, were 5 federal agents. Three of the men wore dark windbreakers with the bright, unmistakable yellow lettering of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed squarely across their backs. The other two agents represented the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division, their expressions carved from solid stone. They did not pause to admire the crystal chandeliers or the premium champagne stations. They fanned out immediately, pushing past the velvet ropes and establishing total operational control over the venue within a matter of seconds. The lead FBI agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a deeply authoritative presence, stepped forward. He did not need a microphone to make his voice heard over the absolute suffocating silence of the dining room. His tone was sharp, professional, and entirely devoid of any sympathy. Liam, Rachel, and Trey, the agent, announced, his booming voice echoing off the high industrial ceilings. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering." The words hung in the air like a physical death sentence. The swift, metallic rasp of heavy steel handcuffs being pulled from tactical belts echoed sharply across the room. The sound broke whatever fragile, desperate illusion my husband and his family were still clinging to. The reality of federal prison had officially arrived at their lavish grand opening. The security guards who had previously pinned Trey to the floor quickly stepped away, backing into the crowd with their hands raised to signal complete compliance with the federal authorities. The moment the physical restraint was lifted, Trey did not try to run. He did not try to fight or argue his innocence. The fake culinary king completely shattered. He collapsed onto his knees, his torn custom velvet dinner jacket soaking up the spilled champagne and crushed caviar. He began sobbing hysterically, wrapping his arms around his own chest and rocking back and forth on the ruined marble floor. The arrogant bravado he had projected all evening was entirely gone, replaced by the pathetic, weeping reality of a man who knew his entire life was over. Two federal agents marched directly toward the stage where Rachel was standing. As they aggressively grabbed her arms to pull them behind her back, her mind completely snapped. The heavy diamond drop earrings she had purchased with my stolen money swung violently against her neck as she thrashed against the agent's tight grip. She refused to look at me or her husband. Instead, she twisted her head and began screaming frantically at her parents. She shrieked at Richard and Beatrice to do something, demanding they call a lawyer, begging them to use their money to stop the arrest. She wailed that she could not go to jail, and that she was not supposed to be humiliated like this in front of high society. The IRS agents moved straight for Liam. My husband did not fight. He did not scream or cry like his sister and brother-in-law. He stood perfectly rigid, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his defeat. He stared blankly ahead as the federal agents aggressively pulled his arms behind his tailored tuxedo jacket and snapped the cold steel handcuffs tightly around his wrists. The sharp click of the locking mechanism finalized his destruction. He was no longer a wealthy financial consultant. He was a federal inmate. Beatrice and Richard watched their two golden children being shackled in front of Chicago's elite society. The country club friends they had desperately tried to impress were actively recording the entire arrest on their smartphones. The absolute social and financial ruin was too much for my in-laws to process. They realized they had absolutely no power, no leverage, and no money to stop the federal government from taking their children away. In a state of sheer, unadulterated desperation, Beatrice and Richard turned their frantic eyes toward me. They scrambled across the dining room floor, completely abandoning all pretense of high-class sophistication. They threw themselves at my feet, literally falling heavily onto their knees right in front of the audio-visual stage. Beatrice reached out with trembling, manicured hands and grabbed tightly onto the fabric of my blood-red silk dress. "Claire, please," Beatrice sobbed, tears ruining her expensive makeup and streaking dark mascara down her pale cheeks. "You have to stop them. Tell the agents it is a massive misunderstanding. Tell them it was just a domestic dispute over business funds. We are family, Claire. We are your family. You cannot let them take Liam away." Richard grabbed the other side of my dress, his pompous demeanor completely obliterated. He wept openly, his face tilted up toward mine in absolute submission. "We will give the house back," Richard begged, his voice cracking with panic. "We will cancel the restaurant lease. We will make Trey pay back every single dollar. Just please call off your lawyer. Tell them we made a mistake. We will do anything you want." I looked down at the two pathetic figures groveling at my feet. These were the same people who had mocked my career, funded my husband's secret mistress, and gleefully celebrated the planned theft of my premarital home. They had gladly watched me work 80-hour weeks to finance their luxurious delusions, fully intending to leave me bankrupt and homeless. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. My heart was a steady rhythmic drum of absolute cold justice. I reached down and firmly grasped the expensive red silk fabric of my designer dress. With a sharp, powerful, and deliberate motion, I violently yanked the material straight out of their desperate, clinging hands. Beatrice stumbled forward, her palms slapping flat against the cold marble floor. I reached into my oversized black leather clutch one final time. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder that Diana had meticulously prepared for me earlier that afternoon. I held it over their heads for a brief second, letting them see the official legal seals stamped across the front cover. I opened my hand and let the heavy folder drop. It hit the floor right between Beatrice's trembling hands with a loud, definitive smack. "Here are the divorce papers and your restraining orders. Find another table. This one isn't for parasites." 6 months passed since that spectacular collapse at the restaurant. The media fallout was instantaneous and absolutely merciless. By the following morning, every major news outlet in Chicago was running the story on their front pages. The spectacular arrest of a prominent financial consultant and his aspiring restaurateur brother-in-law provided endless entertainment for the city. Someone inside the venue had live-streamed the entire confrontation, and the shaky smartphone footage of my in-laws, groveling on the imported marble floor, went completely viral. The elite country club friends who had previously attended their lavish dinner parties immediately severed all ties, treating Richard and Beatrice like highly contagious social pariahs. The federal justice system moved with terrifying efficiency. Diana ensured that the prosecutors had a watertight case, handing them every digital footprint, intercepted document, and recorded confession. Liam tried to hire a high-powered defense attorney, but his frozen bank accounts severely limited his legal options. Standing before a federal judge, the arrogant man who had tried to steal my home and my company was reduced to a shaking, pathetic shell of his former self. He cried openly during his sentencing hearing, begging for leniency and blaming the stress of his corporate job for his temporary lapse in judgment. The federal judge was completely unimpressed by his theatrical tears. Liam was sentenced to 7 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. He traded his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue prison uniform. Trey fared only slightly better. The self-proclaimed king of the Chicago culinary scene wept uncontrollably as the judge handed down his sentence. Because he knowingly accepted stolen federal funds to secure his commercial restaurant lease, he was convicted of complicity in money laundering. He received 3 years in federal lockup. His grand vision of a fine dining fusion empire ended before he could serve a single plate of food. The luxurious venue was seized by the government, the velvet ropes and crystal chandeliers auctioned off to pay restitution. Rachel managed to avoid a prison sentence, but her punishment was arguably a much slower, more agonizing destruction. She desperately claimed ignorance regarding the source of the funds, throwing her own husband and brother under the bus to save herself. The federal prosecutors let her walk, but the Internal Revenue Service was not nearly as forgiving. They slapped her with a massive, insurmountable tax lien for the stolen money that had financed her luxury shopping sprees. The government seized her bank accounts, her vehicles, and every piece of designer jewelry she possessed. The woman who had proudly stood on stage wearing stolen diamonds to insult my generosity now faced a crushing reality. Without her husband's fake wealth or her parents' financial support, Rachel was forced to enter the manual labor force. She currently works as a night shift cleaner at a budget motel on the outskirts of the city, scrubbing dirty floors and changing cheap bed linens just to survive. The ultimate ruin, however, fell squarely upon Richard and Beatrice. They refused to accept the reality of their golden children's guilt. In a desperate, delusional attempt to keep Liam and Trey out of federal prison, my former in-laws completely drained their own life savings. They hired a team of expensive defense attorneys, liquidating their retirement portfolios and taking out massive personal loans they could never possibly repay. When the guilty verdicts were handed down, Richard and Beatrice were left with absolutely nothing. They were forced to declare total bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on their pristine suburban home, evicting them with only the possessions they could fit into a few cardboard boxes. The arrogant matriarch and patriarch, who had looked down on my data analytics firm as a cute little hobby, now lived together in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment. They rely entirely on government assistance to purchase their weekly groceries. As for Monica, her luxurious dreams evaporated the exact moment the federal agents placed Liam in handcuffs. She had spent months bragging to anyone who would listen about the spectacular downtown penthouse her wealthy boyfriend was purchasing for her. When she realized that the $500,000 home equity loan was completely fraudulent and that Liam's assets were entirely frozen, her loyalty vanished instantly. She did not attend a single one of his court hearings. She did not write him letters or offer any emotional support. The very next day, Monica packed up her 3-year-old son, abandoned her apartment, and moved completely out of state. She disappeared into the wind, searching for a new target to fund her expensive lifestyle. Liam lost his freedom, his marriage, his wealth, and his secret second family all in one single devastating sweep. I followed the legal proceedings closely through Diana, maintaining my distance from the actual courtroom drama. I spent those 6 months pouring my energy back into my company, watching my profit margins expand rapidly now that the parasitic drain on my accounts was permanently severed. I felt an incredible, profound sense of peace. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, my executive assistant walked into my office and placed the day's mail on my glass desk. Sitting right on top of the pile was a standard white envelope bearing the distinctive return address of a federal correctional institution. It was addressed to me in Liam's familiar handwriting. I picked up the heavy envelope and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. I pulled out 3 pages of lined notebook paper covered in frantic, messy ink. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and read the first page. It was a pathetic, rambling manifesto of guilt and desperation. He begged for my forgiveness, claiming he realized the massive magnitude of his mistakes. He wrote that he still loved me and asked if I would be willing to visit him during visiting hours. I reached the end of the first page. I smiled, then fed the unread second page directly into my paper shredder. I watched the sharp steel blades of the shredder pull the lined notebook paper down into the machine. The loud mechanical grinding noise filled my quiet office, reducing Liam's desperate apologies and pathetic excuses into hundreds of tiny, illegible white ribbons. I did not even glance at the third page before feeding it into the very same slot. I did not need to read his frantic begging or hear his hollow promises of rehabilitation. His handwritten words held absolutely no power over me anymore. He was a ghost from a past life I had successfully amputated. I emptied the shredder bin directly into the recycling container, dusted off my hands, and completely erased him from my mind forever. My life belonged entirely to me now, and I would never again allow an opportunistic manipulator to infiltrate my personal sanctuary. I took a deep breath, inhaling the quiet calm of my secure office, ready to face the future. Present day. It has been exactly 1 year since that spectacularly chaotic evening at the restaurant. I am standing in my brand new corporate headquarters. We outgrew the old office space months ago. I now occupy a sprawling penthouse suite on the 40th floor of a premier high-rise in the heart of the Chicago financial district. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows offer a breathtaking, unobstructed view of the sprawling city skyline and the deep blue expanse of Lake Michigan. The morning sunlight pours across my imported marble desk, illuminating a workspace entirely devoid of the toxic stress that used to define my daily existence. I take a slow sip of my dark roast coffee, looking down at the bustling streets below with a profound sense of absolute peace. The air up here is clean, sharp, and totally untainted by the parasitic leeches I left behind in the dirt. Leaving that old brownstone behind the very place where he arrogantly forged my signature was the final step in my complete liberation. I sold that massive house entirely in cash to a wealthy foreign investor just days after the trial concluded, using every single dollar of that liquid equity to aggressively expand my corporate infrastructure and dominate my market sector. Without Liam secretly siphoning away my capital and draining my emotional energy, my data analytics firm experienced an unprecedented explosion of growth. In just 12 months, my company has completely tripled in overall market value. We secured massive multi-year contracts with 3 major international logistics corporations completely dominating the regional software market. We expanded our workforce, hired top-tier executive talent away from our biggest competitors, and aggressively acquired 2 smaller competing startup firms. The so-called little data hobby my arrogant former mother-in-law loved to mock is now actively shaping global market trends and setting industry standards across the entire country. I am no longer just a successful founder navigating the challenging corporate ladder. I am a highly respected industry titan. My financial portfolios, still heavily protected within the impenetrable walls of my irrevocable blind trust, reflect a level of generational wealth that Liam and his greedy family could never even begin to comprehend. They foolishly traded their freedom for a cheap temporary illusion, while I quietly and methodically secured a massive permanent empire that nobody can ever take away from me. I turn away from the stunning skyline view and sit down in my ergonomic leather executive chair. Resting in the center of my desk is a thick stack of newly drafted legal documents prepared by Diana. I am not reviewing defensive strategies or asset protection plans today. I am finalizing the charter for a brand new nonprofit organization I personally founded and fully endowed. It is an aggressive, comprehensive financial literacy and legal defense scholarship program specifically dedicated to helping women escape financial abuse. The fund provides victims with ruthless forensic accountants, elite corporate attorneys, and the emergency capital required to untangle themselves from manipulative partners who use money as a weapon of control. We help them restore their ruined credit scores, secure safe independent housing, and legally prosecute the spouses who tried to leave them destitute. I am using the exact same strategic tactics that saved my life to arm other women with the legal heavy artillery they need to completely obliterate their abusers. Every time I sign an approval grant for a new applicant, I feel a deep, resonating sense of genuine happiness. Turning my darkest betrayal into a weapon for justice has healed me completely. I cap my heavy silver pen and look out the massive window one last time, watching the tiny cars move through the distant city streets below. Society pushes a very specific, highly damaging narrative about loyalty, family, and blind forgiveness. They told me blood is thicker than water. They tried to convince me that familial obligation requires you to quietly endure disrespect, blatant financial theft, and constant emotional manipulation just to keep the peace at the holiday dinner table. They expect successful women to shrink themselves to protect the fragile egos of insecure men. But I learned the hard way that sometimes blood is just a leech trying to drain you dry. When you finally identify a parasite actively destroying your financial and emotional foundation, you do not try to negotiate with it. You do not sit down and try to offer it a second chance to feed off your hard work. You surgically remove it, you sanitize the wound, and you move forward into the future with absolute, unyielding strength. The greatest revenge is not explosive anger or public screaming matches. The greatest revenge is achieving absolute untouchable success and executing a brilliant legal strategy with terrifyingly cold precision. Have you ever had to use the law to permanently protect yourself from the greedy people who were supposed to love you? Share your personal stories in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe, and please remember, never let anyone mistake your silence for weakness. The gripping story of Claire's strategic triumph over her deceitful husband and toxic in-laws offers a masterclass in self-preservation and emotional regulation. When faced with absolute betrayal, human instinct urges us to react immediately, to scream demand answers, and unleash our righteous anger. However, the most profound lesson embedded in this narrative is that silence is not a manifestation of weakness. Rather, it is your greatest strategic advantage. By refusing to give her husband the emotional explosion he anticipated, Claire retained complete control over the battlefield. Manipulative individuals feed on emotional chaos. They thrive on your pain, often using your explosive reactions to gaslight you, paint you as the unstable villain, and cast themselves as the victims. When Claire discovered the devastating truth about the embezzled corporate funds, the forged mortgage application, and the secret family, she did not confront him in the heat of the moment. She simply smiled, played her expected role, and methodically built an impenetrable legal fortress. Her absolute emotional detachment allowed her to analyze the chessboard with pristine clarity, while her abusers were utterly blinded by their own arrogance. This narrative teaches us a vital reality about surviving toxic relationships. You do not owe your betrayers a tearful argument, an explanation, or an opportunity to negotiate. True justice is rarely found in loud public screaming matches. It is secured through quiet, airtight boundaries and the cold, unyielding execution of consequences. When you successfully detach your emotions from the parasites who seek to drain your resources, you instantly reclaim your power. You allow the perpetrators to comfortably dig their own graves with their bare hands. If you have ever had to quietly rebuild your life while cutting off toxic people, share your empowering stories in the comments below.